Morning, Long Beach. It's good to be here today. I'm Gary Painter. I direct the Center for Social Innovation at USC Price, and I've been a professor in the school for 20 years, lived in the greater Long Beach area for all of those 20 years, so this place is near and dear to my heart as well. What I'm going to do today is, and I was torn between titles. I have one title in the program. I have one title kind of on the first slide here around moving from data to story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how data and technology, data and evaluation can be used to actually drive social innovation, can drive social change. And a lot of times when people are confronted with that, they immediately kind of sit back and go, well, data. There's so much data out there. I don't know what to do with it all. I'm told I need to have data. I need to, kind of track things. I need to do all these things. But why does it really matter? How is it actually going to affect outcomes? And part of the reason we struggle with that is because we don't know what kinds of frameworks we need to use. When you're talking to, Amgen, they have a high-level objective, right? Cure cancer, right? And how are they going to do that? Well, they actually have a framework for how they're going to do it. And they're going to have a system of people working on different kinds of drugs in different ways. Even to use language like portfolio of opportunities that they're pursuing, right? And they're going to evaluate it in that context. And so that's what I'm going to kind of talk about today is what kind of frameworks actually provide the fertile soil for social innovation. And if we have time at the end, I can talk more about social innovation if you're not familiar with that term per se, but are familiar with innovation. We can talk about the differences there, and then after I talk, I'll be hanging out in the lobby for a little bit as well. So how do you move from data to story? Because you need to not just have data, but you need to actually affect changes. And so you want to ask questions like in my second bullet here, what does useful data look like? You need to have data that spans the policy areas or the issue areas that people are being impacted in. You need to be able to summarize data in ways that describe community change. You need to have context for community neighborhood change so that actors can compare trends, stakeholders, and you need to be able to have data set up, frameworks set up so that you can actually assess community-based interventions or collaborative interventions. So how do you do that? Well, you need to kind of see the data landscape that's out there, access it in ways that are going to be as most efficient as possible because innovation comes from using resources effectively. So you grab secondary data from all sorts of sources that are out there. I have a bunch of acronyms up there. Some of you are tracking with it. Some of you aren't. The American Community Survey. The LOAD system is a job system from the federal government where you can track jobs in every single block group in the city of Long Beach and any block group in the whole country. I can talk to you more about that. You have environmental data from CalEnviroscreen that's available at the local neighborhood level. You also have lots of local administrative data right here in Long Beach, and I haven't actually tracked the city's portal yet to see everything that's available there, but for instance, in the city of Los Angeles, you can get great business investment data, permit data, public safety data, there's school data, there's data that exists, but how do you actually link it in a way that enables the kind of innovative assessment of what you're doing? And so that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. And then there's data that you can't get anywhere else except they're actually talking to the folks that are being impacted. And you have to have these different sources in line. But what I've seen so often that stifles innovation is people spend an enormous amount of time in the third category where they're just surveying people and they're asking kind of before and after, and they don't actually utilize all the other data that's already there. And so you need to have a plan in place to use the data that's there much more broadly. When you're building an evaluation framework, you really need to have at least these three components. There might be a fourth in there that I'll talk about a little bit at the end, but you need to be thinking about it simultaneously so that you can have innovation. You need to decide what are your population level objectives, both for people and places. Okay? And you can't have too many of these. And I'll show you kind of the promise zone model in Los Angeles as an example. You need to be collecting performance metrics, right? Many reasons to do that. And you need to, at the same time, evaluate targeted interventions. So how do you go about doing all that? So we're going to do this Promise Zone model a little bit. Some of you might be familiar with the Promise Zone Initiative, the Promise Neighborhood Initiative. These designations were given out. The reward is that you get bonus points on federal grants if you're within a Promise Zone. The idea is that these areas are poised with the right kinds of nudges to move from really high poverty to neighborhoods of opportunity, right? And why are they poised? Because the city, the community, and the business sector are aligned to allow that transformation to happen. So how are you going to drive transformation? Well, first you have to identify what kind of transformation that you want to observe in your place. And so the central Los Angeles Promise Zone, and I should say that we're the lead evaluation partner on the 2 Los Angeles Promise Zones at USC Price Center for Social Innovation. So we've been working with them to kind of build this framework as we go forward. So the first thing to do is to say, pick a few objectives. And so they picked a few objectives. They want to create economic opportunity, improve educational outcomes, make our neighborhood safe, and build sustainable and livable communities. Does that mean that you don't care about population health? Of course not, right? But you need to be thinking about things in such a way that the 50 to 70 to 90 different actors who are coordinating efforts can kind of focus on those things. And so you have to then say, well, what are the indicators that we're going to measure to achieve those population level objectives? And so the city of Los Angeles, you can't read this, I know, but you can go to the Promise Zone page, LA Promise Zone, and you can see what they're tracking in each one of these categories. So in education, they're tracking from not quite cradle to career, but they have some early markers in 3rd grade reading and 8th grade math and high school graduation and being in college with your 18 to 24-year-old, just to kind of see where are the different metrics that are going to be driving success. Ultimately, the idea is that people are going to be ready for the workforce and successful in the workforce, but you have to track things along the way. So does this focus drive innovation? Does it drive innovation, right, to have these objectives? Well, so there's some pieces of the slide, isn't there? So the answer is not alone, right? So you need that, okay, but not alone. What about performance metrics, right? So for those of you in the city of Long Beach, you have been, I'm sure asked by your department heads, I need my metrics, and we're going to see how we're spending the money and who's being served and all these kinds of things. These things are really important. You have to ask questions around, are we spending the money effectively for these programs? But more importantly, you need to be able to see how people are being affected by programs. You need to tell stories around people, okay? So the programs are affecting people. Does this, from a university perspective or an academic perspective, does this actually allow you to say that this program caused this change alone? Of course not. But if you don't tell the stories of who are being impacted by the programs that you're actually delivering, then you have a bunch of numbers sitting on an open data portal that a lot of people aren't going to resonate with. So this is absolutely critical. Are tracking performance metrics enough to have the kinds of success, catalytic success? And the answer is no. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Now, you've identified what you want to do. You have your population level objectives. You have a system in place to track change, okay? Now it's time to design new opportunities, a new change, right? And where does that come from? Well, it can come from community-based organizations. It can come from the city. It can come from broad-based collaborations. And so you have to figure out what you're going to do, and importantly, you have to think through what it is that what program is to design it in such a way that you can evaluate it after the fact. Let me say that again because I fumbled it a bit, but you have to design your program so that it can be evaluated, right? Many times, programs are rolled out, someone is hired after the fact, some consultant, they say, well, can you evaluate? How did that go? What are the lessons learned? The unfortunate thing is if you approach things in that way, you're not going to learn very much. You're going to think, oh, well, if I had only done this, if I had only done that. So it's really important. If you want innovation, like I said, I use the example of Amgen. They know what they want to achieve. They put a framework in place to achieve it. And so they are learning all along the way. If you don't design for innovation, you're not going to get there. You're not going to learn what you need to learn as you go forward. So you need to think about that ahead of time. In doing all that, okay, so a couple slides flipped out of order. Sorry about that. So what do you need to get innovation, to drive innovation with data? You need all three. You need a focus on population level accountability. You need clear stories of change, both in performance metrics and in people. And you need carefully designed interventions that allow evaluation. So one of the things that we are going to need in the social sector is an innovation framework to apply that we can apply over and over again. And one of the things that the Center for Social Innovation is doing is trying to develop these frameworks so that you can roll them out in complicated ways. As I mentioned the Amgen model, we actually understand private innovation to some extent because we've been doing it for a long time. We know what kinds of frameworks help spur private innovation. What we don't know is in the social sector in the same way. But if you think about the analogies, and I had mentioned this earlier, you actually need to imagine this portfolio of targeted interventions and strategies being evaluated in that context, right? When Amgen is looking at a new drug to cure cancer, they understand that there's external forces that are either hampering the success of an intervention or not. But they also know that if they look at that intervention in the context of everything that they're looking at, they can get to the final outcome, that population level objective, much more effectively, and they can, in some sense, see how interventions both complement each other and sometimes substitute for each other. So those are the kinds of questions we have to ask ourselves.